So 4 questions for today. What is a pantomime? What is procrastination? What is life? And what is death? Don't worry, no answers. The ancient text reminds us to choose life against death. The modern texts play with us. Is it better to go slow or to go fast? All 4 of these questions lead to the matter of deadlines. Will you ever finish that dissertation? Will you ever finish this life? Will the environmental movement succeed without deadlines? And what if it will only succeed without deadlines as long as they understand them the wrong way? I promise not to answer any of these questions, but to probe them instead. I'll begin with the story of the United Church of Christ Synod, which had a lot to say about deadlines. In June, we had spent a year, actually 2 years, in the anti-fracking movement in the UCC. The first year, there were about 40 of us involved in developing a resolution for the New York conference. And that conference resolution was to ban fracking within the year. And of course, Governor Cuomo got word that our 170 churches might do that and immediately banned fracking. It was just astonishing how potent just the whisper that we might be writing that resolution was to him. But in truth, we spent a lot of time wordsmithing that resolution and trying to say, well, how soon should it happen? And what does it matter if it happens in New York? And it was one of those grueling processes that exhausted you and fulfilled you at the same time. You felt like, by God, at least you were doing something. And you also felt like, oh my God, I'm doing something. It was this simultaneity of small, careful, local politics, which, as many of you know, because so many of you are involved with them, can really be mind-numbing sometimes. At the Synod, a year later, there was a similar group, only this time with 20 states. Most of the states were places where fracking was actually being done: Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania. And there were about 40 of us who, I counted them, had 119 conference phone calls last year, developing a resolution that was not just about fracking, but what was designed to set a deadline for the time at which we would be free of fossil fuels. And finally, after much conversation on these phone calls, well, most of us were double timing it, you can imagine. You've been on a phone call, you know what it's like. You're doing your nails and listening, and every now and then you hope nobody's watching what you're really doing. Anyway, on this phone call, the controversy that developed was what should be the deadline for complete and total freedom from fossil fuels. And the date 2080 won the day. I can tell you why. I can even tell you what most of the arguments were for why. The argument came from engineers and scientists, mostly in Pennsylvania, who are genuine experts on climate change. And they said, don't make it like Kyoto, which was too utopian ever to succeed. And it will take at least 3 generations to be free of fossil fuels. At least 3. You just can't do it by tomorrow. You cannot do it. And out of respect for their arguments and the excellent way that we heard them and they made them, we set it as 2080 and decided that we were just the avant-garde of the environmental movement in the United Church of Christ. So we went to Synod and had 2 days of hearings. Rooms were packed, 500 people, all day, 8 hours of hearings, big arguments. And sure enough, the Synod voted, and guess what they voted for the deadline to be? 2020. That we should be free of fossil fuels by 2020. Imagine our amusement. Now, President Obama is arguing 2030, and candidate Clinton is arguing 2027. And you can have your own argument. But it matters. It matters what the deadline is, more symbolically, I believe, than truly. What many people argued was wrong with Kyoto was that it reached too far, too soon, before a consensus and intensity was built. And the other big thing that happened with Kyoto is the more fascinating one. The Earth itself changed while we were trying to change it. So the deadline that was set in Kyoto, come and gone, nations did not buy into it. So, in fact, the Earth situation deteriorated more than Kyoto thought it would, and solar advanced more than anybody thought it would. So everything shifted out from under this wonderful deadline. And what I'm trying to argue is that every deadline or model for action is a kind of pantomime of procrastination. What's a pantomime? A pantomime is when you look like you're talking, but you're not. You're almost making fun of your talking. A pantomime of procrastination is when you talk to yourself and everybody else who will listen every week about doing something important, like by this weekend I'll know whether I'm leaving him or her or not, and that's that. Good morning, Monday. How you doing, sweetheart? When you procrastinate, you really don't know whether to exhale or get off the pot. Plant the garden or not plant the garden. Clean out the closet or not clean out the closet. But all the way along, while you're saying, by God, you're going to do something by then and then, you know you're just kidding. Because you know you can't. Because you've been caught before and you'll be caught again. You're not really walking the talk, you're talking the walk. You're whispering to yourself. You might be shouting it out loud to others, but you're whispering to yourself. You're kidding. You're giving yourself a pep talk, which is different than acting. What's the best way to start something? Start it. What's the best way to begin something? Begin it. What's the best way to do something that's long and hard? Chop it up into little pieces. Best way to write a book? 3 pages a day. Every day. Procrastination has a pantomime because we procrastinate for really good reasons sometimes. Really, really good reasons. Plans need to change. The earth changes. You change. The circumstances change. You have to deal with the moving parts. Plans need to be changed and be revised just about every second based on new information, and the new information that comes literally from the living organism, which is the earth, which is also you. So why does this matter? The climate deadline or your own version of procrastination, why does this matter to you, if at all? Surely climate change matters to you. It will knock on your own door if it hasn't already. You also have citizenship obligations to consider, as well as those of your own faith. You really do give a damn about other people. Some of us even give a damn about the people whom we know Jesus called the least of these, and we think, most of us, that the Pope is right when he says that the first people to be hurt by climate change will be the people who are already being hurt by just about everything. And you have some sense, even in that infamous pantomime, that you would do something about it if you could do something about it when you do get around to it, if you get around to it. Right? I meant that as a compliment. So let me give a few hints about what we might know about moving from the death of refusing to make choices about life to the life of agreeing to make choices about life. I am not going to tell you to hurry up or put more shoulder to the wheel or the grindstone. I'm not going to tell you to try harder or to spend more time on conference phone calls or political action. Even those things are good. They do matter for you and for others. But I want you to help me to go deeper here, where we genuinely choose the life that we are offered. And I think we have to go slow enough and careful enough to involve multiple people in multiple parts of saving ourselves and the earth from ourselves and the earth. We have to be careful not to let things get so bad that some authoritarian something is all we have left to help us. We have to develop multiple centers of power, understanding that fossil fuels are often about centralizing centers of power and getting us all to serve them fast. We need to go as slow as evolution and as fast as we did in the Second World War. Both, not either. And by slow, I mean finding your hope on all those conference phone calls. And then we have to find our minds and our science and harness our minds and our hopes and our hearts to our science. And then we might just be ready for 2027, 2030, and 2080, because they are all going to come, whether we meet our deadlines or not. And I guarantee that the only thing we can know about 2027, 2030, and 2080 is that we have no idea about 2027, 2030, or 2080. So we just got back from Star Island, 7 miles out to sea off Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where Warren and I go many, many summers. Warren did the program and I did the chapel service, preaching every morning at 10 a.m. I was very impressed with myself, 5, 6 in a row. Yesterday I didn't preach and I didn't know what to do in the morning. I got a little anxious. Warren did a program on white racism with all white folk. Even though Eric Jackson, many of you remember Eric, came out one day and he said he'd really never seen white folk agonize about their own racism before, which was a real blessing. Blessing of a thing to say, but also true. It was great to be with all white folk talking about white racism. It got very real after about the second day. And I was preaching about stars and conjurers and magicians. And my theme was how to develop a positive picture of the future, one so strong that when you hear the word 2080, you say, yeah, I can't wait till 2080. One so strong that we refuse to accept anything catastrophic or live in our own insipid catastrophism. Like that word, catastrophism? It's almost as interesting as racism. I even called the Pope a bit of a catastrophist, and the environmental movement sometimes catastrophizing. Because you see, until we develop a positive picture of a future, we will basically imitate the religious right in our spiritual muscles. Watch it. I cannot believe I saw you in the grocery store with a plastic bag. You don't drive a Prius. You don't drive. You do drive. We have, in the progressive left, in the environmental movement, developed a kind of punishmentalism about the environment. We're bad, and we don't know how to be good. It's the same thing the right does about sex. You're bad, and you don't know how to be good. When you get back from hell, give us a call, and we'll take care of you. The religious left and the religious right link arms in catastrophism. which is finally a lack of trust in us, about us. It is a lack of trust in us, about us. In me, about me, in you, about you, and in us, about us. We messed everything up this long, and things are so bad. As the president himself says, this is the first generation to experience the casualties and consequences of climate change, and it's the last generation that can do anything about it. I disagree. It's the first generation that can do something about it, which will create another generation that can do something about it. Lack of trust in us, about us, is the catastrophe. It's a catastrophe of democracy. It's a catastrophe of hope. It's a catastrophe of the democratic, hopeful spirit. And it's bad religion, shame and blame. So simultaneous to our typical UCC conference on Star Island, you can imagine what we were like. We're sort of the pedal pusher crowd. And the men wear Florida shirts. There was another conference with us. And that conference was a Unitarian conference. And it was the Institute on Religion and Science, IRIS. A bunch of Unitarian academics who made a lot of fun of themselves. They had their own program, but we worshiped together. When not discussing jokes they were telling about themselves. Of course, they wanted very little Jesus. That was fine. But they had a great joke, a new one I'd heard about Unitarians. Why aren't Unitarians good hymn singers? And they're not good hymn singers because they're always looking ahead to the third stanza to find out what they disagree with in that verse so they can be ready for it. I didn't tell that about them. They told it about them. But the subject for their event was queer theory and theology and science. So I learned so much by going over to their programs about queer theology, which goes to this question of getting through the pantomime of procrastination. Obviously, you move beyond shame and blame, out of any binary. You even move out of the binary of shame and blame and grace and hope. And you live in both of them at the same time. You are heteroglossia. Many words at the same time. The slogan they had all week, they had little buttons, I am multiple, I am multiplicity. But where they wanted us to start with the catastrophe stuff I was trying to preach was to engage in a great cloud of unknowing and unlearning, starting by unlearning and moving from unlearning into the glorious art of failure. Unlearning, learning to fail, becoming multiple, and not having the binaries of hope and despair, shame and you're okay, shame and grace. I'm not sure I understand yet how to do that, but boy, did that restore trust in the me I know as me. The one who really doesn't know what to say and is half hopeful and half despairing. Boy, does that restore my trust in you, the one who's half hopeful and half despairing, the one who's half angry and half serene, the one who is multiple. So why do I want to get beyond procrastination about the environment? Because without a deadline, there won't be a lifeline that takes it seriously enough. Why do I want to understand these deadlines as outside of the frame of all or nothing? Because they are outside of the frame of all or nothing, because all or nothing is not a good frame. Like heaven and hell is not a good frame, and good and bad is not a good frame, and right and wrong is not a good frame. What is a good frame is a multiple frame. And I also know that life is participation. And when those of you who make it to 2080 make it to 2080, I want you to say, I was at Selma. You've heard people say that, right? I was there. I was part of it. I helped make it happen. I voted to change the United Church of Christ to 2020 in 2014. By God, I was there. I was a part of it. Because by being a part of it, it's the only way you can keep somebody from telling you you've got such a big problem that they need to resolve it. See, life is participation, and if we let only one power, the Pope, the President, the UCC Synod, or as Donald Trump would say, whatever, take credit for the success of the environmental movement, which success we all want and want to look back on and say we were part of, the earth will not be saved. The earth will not be saved even if we get to our fossil fuel criteria. The earth will be saved when there's a whole new story about us, which is that we are good, trustworthy, and can trust each other.